Well, hello and welcome to the Lending Podcast. We have a special edition. Today is JB, the Guru of Mortgage, and myself, your usual host today at Benchmark in Austin, Texas. This is something different. What are we doing, JB?
We're going to do whiteboard, a special whiteboard edition of the Lending Podcast.
Nice.
And we're going to talk specifically about the temporary buy-down product that will allow our homeowners out there to have a discounted payment for the first few years that they have their mortgage.
That's good. I'm going to put a disclaimer on this one. So if you're listening to this on an audio version, whether it's Apple Podcasts or something else, please note we actually have a whiteboard today in front of us to go over the numbers. Now, of course, we're going to say them, but to see them is something different because we've done a temporary buy-down topic before, but doing it over again, but something new with numbers on the board, real numbers, makes the biggest difference.
That's right.
So.
Well, and here we are, beginning of 2025, and fortunately and unfortunately, we are at the highest interest rates we've had in the last year. So with that
not
said,
counting like the last week of the year,
right,
counting like 12 months.
Oh, right, exactly. Last 12 months. Good point.
Yeah.
Good distinction. Yeah, not the last 10 days. So we've seen some elevated interest rates. So what has that done to some of our buyer activity? Potentially is it might have caused you to tap the brakes once again and say, you know what, I'm going to wait until interest rates go down. Personally, and I know Jeff can speak to this, we have seen our buyers in the last 2 to 3, 4 months, even at elevated interest rates, get phenomenal deals on their homes, significant discounts. I have 2 examples I'll share with you real quick. Contracts that we have that have come in this week. We had a house that was listed for $425. Our buyers went in with an offer of $325.
Whoa.
And did not even get a counter. The seller accepted $100,000 off of the list price. We had another example. It was listed for $700,000. They negotiated down and accepted $675 off of the list price. So is every house going to be like that? Of course not. Is there value in the marketplace? Yes. And how do we utilize the opportunities that we have to capitalize on that for our buyers? And yes, it's amazing to get a discounted price on the house. And we're going to talk about that. I just kind of gave you 2 examples of how that's an amazing strategy to just go in and negotiate a low price. However, getting a price reduction doesn't always give you the payment and meet your payment goals that you're looking for.
Right.
So we're going to talk about this temporary buy-down strategy, which you can use instead of getting the lowest possible price out there. We're going to talk about getting some seller-paid closing costs, some seller concessions, right, to help you reduce your payment for the first really up to 3 years. This is a 3-2-1 buy-down. So I'm just going to walk through this whiteboard session here. I know it's already written out. So if you're at home, you may have seen this before, right, watching this video. But to put it into like real context of how practical is it to get a 3-2-1 buy down? How possible is it to negotiate this with the seller? And then how does it actually impact your payment? That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. And just, as we're getting into this example, just know there are different kinds of temporary buy downs, especially when it comes to the term of how long they go for.
That's right.
So you can do a 1-year buy down, a 2-year buy down, and a 3-year buy down. These are temporary. Temporaries obviously are not permanent. You can also spend money for a permanent buy down. We have all kinds of other episodes about that. You can look at that. This episode specifically is a temporary buy down.
That's right. Yeah.
Good.
And I'm doing the 3-2-1 buy down as an example because it's actually the most expensive. It's the most that you would need to get from a seller. And of course, in the course of negotiation, if they won't pay that much in closing costs or whatever, then you can back it down, like Jeff said, to a 2-year, a 1-year, et cetera.
So a lot of times what they're talking about when you see an advertised rate from a builder lender or some other big box lender, maybe it's coming to your email, maybe it's a flyer, and they're saying we can get you rates in the 4s. A lot of times they're combining a permanent buy down with a temporary buy down. So they're getting to that this way, and we're going to go over it. So I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm making some presumptions here. Again, we're going to estimate the starting interest rate. Interest rates today, I looked at some national averages this morning, anywhere from maybe 6.9 to 7.5, somewhere in there. So For the purposes of this illustration, I'm using a 7.5% 30-year fixed starting or permanent interest rate. Okay, so that's your permanent rate would be 7.5. Now, the 3-2-1 buy down, what that technically means is the first year of your loan, you have a 3% rate reduction. So instead of 7.5, you're going to have 4.5% interest rate on your loan. Therefore, your payment is going to be calculated as a 4.5% interest rate. Year 2, you're going to have a 2% rate reduction, which would be 5.5%, right? And then year 3 obviously would be a 1-year reduction, which is 6.5%. So the payment savings, and I kind of outline this here, the first year payment savings at a 4.5% interest rate is $770 per month.
What home price was this at? Or
This is
price?
a $400,000. Thank you. I forgot to write that down.
$400,000 loan. And obviously, people out there that are new to our industry, when you see rates change like this is not considered an adjustable rate mortgage. This is not an ARM. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's a permanent 30-year fixed interest rate. We're just simply using seller-paid closing costs to reduce the first couple of years' payments. And as Jeff mentioned, you can do this on a 2-year buy down. You can do it on a 1-year buy down. This is the sort of the most robust option, which is a 3-2-1. And yes, it's based on a $400,000 loan amount. Okay, so these numbers would change a little bit if the loan amount was less. So the second year savings would be $525 a month. Third year savings is $268 a month per month for the 12 months leading up to kind of month 37 of the loan. So if you have the loan 36 months, 3 years, you're going to use up all of this money that's been set aside by the seller. So I want to pause right there for a second and just kind of reiterate how this works. So at closing, the seller is actually going to make a contribution towards your closing costs. And this total amount of the buy down is going to be a line item closing costs on your settlement statement. The seller contributes towards that line item closing costs, which basically takes all of this prepaid interest and sets it aside in like a holding account, like a holding tank.
So it's like an escrow.
It's like a side escrow account. Yeah, It has nothing to do with taxes and insurance escrow, but it has to do with this prepaid interest. Okay.
Hold on. And so what you're telling me is the seller's paying for it because the buyer cannot actually pay for this on their own.
That's right.
So this has to be, so even if you want this and the seller's not willing to pay for this, you can't do it.
Correct.
So this is a negotiation that the realtors have to do together.
That's right.
Good.
And that's why you'll see perhaps on a new build, new constructions, the builder, the seller will contribute towards these temporary buy downs. The seller can contribute toward temporary buy down. Really any interested third party. So it could also be a lender contribution, some contribution towards this, or even a realtor. So your full payment here on $400,000 loan at a 7.5% 30-year fixed interest rate, your full payment is actually $27.96. Now that is principal and interest only. That does not include your taxes and insurance. So then what I'd normally do to get a full payment is we're basically going to take 3%, okay? 3% of this amount, which is $12,000 a year, divide by 12, which is $1,000 a month, and add it to this principal and interest, and that is roughly what your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance would be. Okay, that is a ballpark. It's probably a little high in some areas, but if you figure that your taxes are about 2% of your loan amount and your insurance is about 1%, we take 3% of this number, divide by 12, get $1,000 a month added to that. So your full payment in 37 months is going to be roughly $3,800 a month on a $400,000 loan. Okay, that's if you don't refinance, if you don't do anything, don't sell the property, keep it. Now, what is the payment actually going to be the first 3 years? Well, with that same taxes and insurance math of roughly $1,000 a month, you can take $1,000 a month, add it to this $2,026. That's your payment for year one. So total principal, interest, taxes, and insurance is roughly $3,026, a far cry, of course, from $3,800. So that's where the benefit of the temporary buy down comes into play. I want to buy a house. I really need some payment relief. This is a great way to do it because it reduces that first year payment by almost $800 a month per month.
So that's amazing. So, I think a lot of people, when we have conversations about what are your monthly budgets, and you're like, I do qualify for $400,000 home, but I don't like that monthly budget amount. This is a great option to shave off $770 a month of your payment.
Yes.
For the first year.
Yes.
As you start getting used to what's going on with your life.
That's right. And there's some nuances here that I really like about the temporary buy downs. Number one, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, the total cost to do this buy down is about $18,700, okay, which is about 4.5%, 4.7% of the loan amount. So when you're negotiating with the seller, if you want the seller to pay the full amount, you're essentially asking for 5% roughly towards closing costs, right? 5% of the sales price. Mm-hmm. And this technically is on the loan amount. So it depends on what the sales price is, what your loan amount is, how much you'll actually need for the temporary buy down. Of course, we like to be in that discussion with you as you're negotiating with your seller. And they may not be willing to pay all that. That's okay. We can work around it. Not every loan program will allow 4.7% seller concessions towards closing costs. Some conventional loan programs will not. VA programs have some restrictions depending on the loan size, depending on the amount. However, FHA does. So FHA actually allows 6% seller concessions. So you could do an FHA mortgage, get all the contribution from the seller, and pay that entire 3-2-1 buy down. Some conventional products will allow it as well. Depends on how much you're putting down. You have to put at least 10% down to get 6% seller concession. So that's a lot of technical stuff. The bottom line is your annual savings with this program is anywhere from $3, $6 to $9 grand, depending on the years 1, 2, or 3. So year one, you're going to save about $9,000 the first year. You're going to save $6,000 the second year and $3,000 a little over the third year. If you add all that up, that's roughly a little over 18 grand. Okay. And so this particular program, what I really love about it is the fact that this money set aside by the seller is buyer money. So if something happens in a year and you have to refinance this loan, whatever the balance is left, whatever you have not used from your temporary buy down account, actually reduces your principal when you pay the loan off.
Right.
So instead of owing $400,000 or a little less than that after year one, you've got $9,000 left in your temporary buy down account. It's going to reduce your principal to say $390. When you go to refinance, you can use that temporary buy down money to reduce your principal amount and make it easier for you to refinance because you have more equity in the house.
Yeah, that's a huge credit.
Yep, that's a huge credit. So, if you stay in the house 3 years, if rates kind of stay elevated and you don't really have that opportunity to refinance, then you're gonna use up all that $18,000. Your payment, of course, is going to adjust each year, but it's not an adjustable rate mortgage, as you said. It's fixed rate mortgage, and your interest rate from years 4 through 30 would be at 7.5 in this example. Again, this works if your start rate is 6.5%. If your start rate is 5.5%. You would simply lower your first, second, and third year loans by that appropriate amount. If you had a start rate of 6% on your loan, you can get a 3% mortgage for your first year. So it's incredible. And there's some ways to use both a permanent buy down, like you said, and a temporary buy down. Money coming from the seller, money coming from the builder if it's a new build, to execute on this plan.
So if I understand right, a simple way to think about it is that total cost, the seller is paying basically the rate reduction difference.
That's right.
So these savings of $770 a month, the first year example, were actually being paid by the seller ahead of time into that
That's right.
account.
Yes.
So that's basically, if I understand right, these things don't cost extra money. It's just basically almost like a prepayment set apart to put you on a better payment plan to save you every month of your budget, as I keep hitting the board.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second. So let's say that instead of negotiating $18,000 from the seller to pay for a temporary buy down, you negotiate $18,000 off the price. Okay, that's a win. This becomes a $382,000 loan roughly now. You're not going to have the same kind of payment savings anywhere close to
Not
that.
even close.
At a 380K loan versus a 400K loan,
Right.
your payment may only change 50, 60 bucks a month, maybe $100 a month. And so this strategy is really designed.
Right.
There's a couple different ways to use it. What I like about it is, perhaps you have two people buying a house together, and maybe one of them is in school, or maybe one of them is going to get a job in the next year. Your income's going to go up, but right now, this $3,800 payment would be a crunch. But you can do $3,000 a month because you've been paying roughly that in rent, give or take. This is a strategy that would help you get into a home. Again, might be able to negotiate some pretty significant savings right now with these sellers out there.
Yeah.
And especially with rates kind of staying elevated, it looks like. This right here is your plan to achieve your payment goal. And then again, rates drop. We call you in a year or so and say, hey, you're not going to believe this, but a 30-year fixed rate is now 5.5% or 6%. You can refinance out of this at any time. There's no prepayment penalty. And again, whatever unused portion of your temporary buy down account is sitting there is going to reduce your principal, and you're basically refinancing less principal, it's almost like paying for your refinance if there are costs associated with your refinance, which sometimes there's not, but in most cases there's some costs. And so that principal reduction is going to lower that principal amount, allow you to maybe roll in some of those closing costs and bring zero to closing.
Yeah, well, when you're looking at $770 a month difference, especially for those that are first-time home buyers, they're going to be spending a lot of money furnishing the house.
Yeah.
They're going to be buying appliances. They're going to be setting things up on their home, maybe building a garden in the back. Who knows? So there's a lot of costs that are associated with moving into your home.
Absolutely.
And getting that ready to live in. So that budget savings every month can be huge for people.
Exactly.
So how to get this onto your contract is something that's negotiated the initial phase of the contract, right?
Yes. Yeah, you want to negotiate it up front with your agent as you're presenting your offer. And now there's times where after the home inspection, there may be some additional negotiation that happens, but loop your lender in on that. Like, we really like to be involved, number one, before the offer ever goes into a seller. Right. And number two, after the inspection period, where there might be some discussion of a price reduction and or seller concessions towards closing costs because maybe there's some repairs that need to get done or something. So loop your lender in on that discussion. I think it's important to structure the contract to maximize your financing opportunities. And your agent may not always know what those are. That's not a knock against your agent. A very seasoned real estate agent may not know that the particular loan program will allow for a little more seller concessions or a little less, or we ask for too much or too little. So we're a team, we're a three, buyer's agent, buyer, lender should be working together in those negotiations.
Yeah. Wonderful.
You bet. Yeah. Now, the last thing I'll say is, let's say that we don't have enough for a 3-2-1 buy down. We're just going to do a 2-1 buy down.
You're just shaving off the red?
Yeah. So basically, we don't have a 3% rate reduction. We'd have a 2%. We don't have a 4.5% rate. We'd have a 5.5%. And we don't have this payment. We'd have a 22.
But I like that one.
I know the red one's the best. The red one's the biggest. But here's
it's still a lot of money though.
Here's kind of how the math works. On a 2-1 buy down, you're not going to have this $9,200 for year one reduction. You're only going to have the 6 and the 3. So it actually cuts the amount in half that you need from the seller. So you only need $9,400 from the seller. So if they'll say, well, we'll give you $10,000, but we're not going to give you $20,000. Well, then we could pivot to the 2-1 buy down. Of course, the first year rate would be 5.5. The second would be 6.5.
You're still saving over $500 a month.
Still saving $525 a month,
right.
$268 year two, and it gives you that opportunity still to refinance. There's not as much sitting in that temporary buy down escrow account. That's okay. If we get to the end of year two, then you're going to use up all that money. If you refinance or sell it before the end of year two, then you'll still have a balance in that temporary buy down account. So I think it's something that our buyers right now should absolutely be discussing, should be talking about with your agents and be thinking about as you're making an offer. Of course, it depends on the loan structure. It depends on a lot of different factors. But this is out there. There is confusion about it in the marketplace, like how it works. And the biggest takeaway is that it's not an adjustable rate. You're not going to get in trouble with your payment because you're going to know what your permanent payment is going to be before you ever write that contract. And that's super important. If you know, okay, 2 years from now, that's going to be my permanent payment, I'm okay with that number, then we can tackle something like this. But you don't want to go into it expecting your payment's going to stay in that reduced state forever, because it will adjust.
And just for a little clarification on that, you are still qualified as if the 7.5% rate is your rate.
That's right.
Anyway.
That's right.
So you're not being qualified on a 4.5% rate. You're being qualified on a 7.5% rate from your lender.
Yeah, really important point, so that we're not putting you in a position to fail.
Yeah. Our goal is to make your dreams come true, and that the ability for you to repay your loan is achievable. So I love this. This is great.
Yeah, thanks. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please reach out if you have comments, questions, suggestions, concerns, all those things. We're here for you to support you. And again, this is just one example. There's a million, but let us run the numbers for you. That's what we do all day long.
Thanks so much. You have a great day out there, and please like, subscribe, share to the Lending Podcast.
Take care. Happy New Year.